more of an interviewer than just a conversationist. So my publisher said, you guys have too much fun. But anyway, so I have to. So this is the first time I'm trying to be more like a interview. So let's start by, could you tell us about your name and what you do? And I'm sure I will dive into a conversation later. But anyway, so yes, please, your name and what do you do?
So my name is Catlin Tucker, and I was a high school English language arts teacher for 16 years. In the last 2 years, I have been focusing on my doctoral work, focused on the topic of teacher engagement in blended learning courses and working as a blended learning coach. So I'm not working with any one particular district. I work with many districts, really helping to support teachers and be kind of like a lead coach, so that the coaches who live on those campuses and in those districts, they shadow me when I work with teachers in this shift to blended learning. We do everything from co-lesson design to I get in the classrooms during implementation to give feedback and coaching. And I've written several books on blended learning, both for a teacher audience and a leader audience, as well as a coaching audience, like the folks who are there to support teachers in this shift.
Well, thank you. Those that's by the way, that's I think should fix the standard of being a good interviewer to begin with. Because you said my name is, you can say, okay, that's very good. So I'm going to ask you some questions, maybe beyond your expertise, but just but as a teacher, So what do you think of the current education? Think about education system. That is it working?
I would say not for most kids, or not for a lot of kids. It still surprises me when I go into schools where you have so many teachers who are still kind of writing the single agenda for the class on the board and then kind of marching through that agenda with students and not really prioritizing kind of individual needs or thinking about how to give students more agency in the lessons themselves. So still a lot of kind of one size fits all approach to instruction and facilitation, which, as we know, doesn't work for a lot of kids, right? As soon as it's too fast or it's too slow or it's too rigorous or it's too easy, we lose kids and, they start making their own fun in the classroom, which creates this kind of challenging atmosphere for teachers and students.
Well, thank you. What do you think of technology? Because you've been arguing for blended learning for a long time. One thing I've been arguing for is that teachers need to step back from teaching. So tell me about your work. You can talk about dissertation. You can talk about anything that's related to technology. It has you can have access to a lot of this. How is that happening?
Well, I see technology as kind of freeing the teacher from some of these traditional roles in a classroom. I don't think that we need to prioritize the transfer of information in a classroom the way that we have done in the past. So when I think about blended learning, eventually this is just going to be learning, right? Like we have technology, it's permeating all of these different parts of our lives, including education, though education has been much slower to adopt technology than other spaces. But these technology-enabled kind of instructional models, I think, make it easier for teachers to move out of that role as expert in charge at the front of the room and embrace some of these other roles as coach, somebody who's giving feedback and supporting students as they're working, really shifting the focus from presentation of information and assessment on products to how do we sit next to kids and make sure that they really understand key concepts and they're able to apply specific skills, and just kind of rethinking our role and embracing more of a partnership model. And I think that's only possible really in the dynamic way that I'm seeing it done in some classrooms because of the technology, because we can allow students to kind of practice at their own pace, connect online in shared spaces to collaborate, access resources, watch videos, all of these pieces that don't require the teacher to be like on the stage.
Yeah, so that's actually what I'm very interested in, to say, have you seen a class, or can you imagine a class, the teacher just doesn't teach, but just facilitate, organize resources, and kids can still learn, right?
Yes.
Say more about that.
Oh, yeah. No, I can absolutely imagine this space. In fact, one of my big concerns when I think about our current situation and going back to school in fall, a lot of teachers are likely going to be on like a modified schedule where they only see students for maybe 2 days a week for a chunk of time as opposed to every day. And my fear is teachers will they'll retreat to standing at the front of the room and talking at kids because they feel like, well, I've got to get through all this information. And I actually feel like I would much rather see teachers embracing their role as facilitators in the classroom, sitting next to students, conferencing, checking in, personalizing instruction, giving feedback, all of those pieces which don't involve the teacher at the front of the room, but really require that the teacher sit with the student.
Okay, so you are going to revolutionize education already with your thoughts like that. It's that because I've been thinking a lot about how for a long time teachers did not have to do that. So you really believe, because you've done this, that with today's technology access, students can actually learn without being taught by their immediate teacher.
I mean, I think they need access to information, and they need support. I think skill building around critical thinking, right? But they can access information. They don't need it to come straight out of the teacher's mouth in order to learn it. And then I think in addition to accessing information, whether that is in a video or reading a text or listening to a podcast or whatever media they're engaging with, then they also need that connection with community to construct knowledge, to make meaning together. And that is something that I see neglected a lot in classrooms as well, where if the focus is on the teacher, are we giving students the opportunity to engage as active members of a learning community to make sense of this information? And I think there's a lot of value in letting students control the pace at which they consume and process information, and then have conversations with their peers about what they're learning and the questions that they have. And sometimes I almost feel like the traditional teacher role just gets in the way of that process.
Tell me more about how the traditional way of teachers may get in the way of that process.
I mean, the more we talk, the less kids get to, right? And the more we stand up in front, the less opportunities we have to personally engage with them. And every teacher knows that each student is unique and has slightly different needs. And when we spend so much time in those traditional roles, trying to kind of like march everybody through a process or through information, we're neglecting that personalization. And so for me, it's, how do we use these different blended models, these instructional models that use technology to create that time and space in the classroom to sit next to kids and allow kids to engage in conversation? But what's fascinating to me is in my work with teachers, there are still so many teachers who fear those conversations, who fear that collaboration among students, even though it's critical that they are allowed opportunities to make meaning as a community. And so I just worry in this traditional role where the teacher is talking a lot, orchestrating the lesson, that we're not nurturing those other parts of the learning happening in our classrooms or online.
That's something actually, what you said about fear is something that's of great interest to me. Why do you think teachers fear?
I think there is a real control dynamic in education. And so teachers fear releasing some of that control. And when I am training teachers around blended learning, I am very frank at the beginning of our work. At its heart, blended learning is a shift in control from teacher to learner. What I am advocating for is not a hierarchy where the teacher is at the top and the learners are at the bottom, but much more of an egalitarian kind of approach where everybody is working in harmony to to make progress toward learning objectives or learning goals. And so for me, I think teachers who have who've been used to that control, they worry about what will happen if they release it. Like, will students take responsibility for their learning? Will they do what I'm asking them to do? Will they behave? And for me, I feel like I think a lot of the problems that we encounter in education around behavior and students taking responsibility for learning is that they have no control in the classroom, right? They experience so few opportunities to practice self-regulation, to make key decisions about their learning. And so, for me, I feel like the more you let go and you give control to students, that is going to it's going to have a positive impact on those relationships with kids. But there's just this fear of like, what's going to happen if I let go, that a lot of teachers wrestle with. And it's not something that in my own practice, I really did. I had the traditional control at the start, but as soon as I started to like release it and really partner with students, it changed my entire teaching reality.
Well, that's what I want to ask. How did you become like this, or how? Well, maybe you were like this. So tell me a little bit about your own personal journey into this. This is quite fascinating, right? How did you?
Yeah. No, I tell teachers all the time, I started very traditionally. I got my credential at UC Santa Barbara and my master's in education. And I went into the classroom expecting to teach just the way that I was taught. And unfortunately, that did not yield the outcomes I had imagined when I daydreamed about my classroom in credential school. Students were not that excited to be in class. They did not lean into the learning. They did not seem excited to be there. They did not want to engage in conversation or take risks. And I thought, oh my gosh, I have made an enormous mistake. This is not what I thought I was signing up for. And for me, the switch started when I was on maternity leave with my first child, and I taught a series of online college level writing courses. And my interest in technology was piqued, although I worked in a very low tech high school. Like, it's still kind of a low tech high school. But I figured, like, either you can get a different job or you can try something different and see if it changes. And for me, I started integrating first online discussions and then shifting to blended learning without any professional training at all. And the impact on my class and my students and their engagement and their enthusiasm and their willingness to take risks was unbelievable. And so for me, as I started releasing that control and I started designing these other lessons that really shifted the focus from me to my students, and the impact was so immediate and so radical that it just opened the floodgates for me in terms of like being open and wanting to take risks and experiment and really treat my classroom like a laboratory and just observe kids and figure out what was working for them. And when I tried something and it totally bombed, instead of feeling like that was a personal failure, using those as moments to learn and check in with kids and get feedback and like, why didn't that work out? And why didn't you enjoy that? And how would you suggest we do this differently next time? And it was really from that space that I started blogging and writing books and trying to like scream from the mountaintops, like, hey, this can be different.
No, that's fascinating. I have talked to a lot of teachers, a lot of them, and the ones who became like you normally started by themselves. Normally, not professional development, not training. You just start, and then you decide, okay, I need to find more information. I need to learn more. They become your self-organized learners. So that is the fascinating piece. But we have them, millions of teachers. How do you think they can get started? We tell them, we talk to them, but where is that niche? That's, oh my God, okay, this just struck me. I got to do this. How do you think the millions of teachers can change, with or without us or you? Okay, sorry about
right.
that.
I honestly think that if we're going to really make dramatic change in education, we have to start building professional learning into the infrastructure of our teachers' school days. And so what I mean is, yeah, you're going to have people like me who either are super go-getters and they just pursue their own learning and they're going to make it work, or who stumble onto something and have a great success like I did and want to build on that. But for your average teacher who is, this job is so challenging on so many levels. And most teachers are like, treading water to keep their heads above like the tidal wave of work that they're dealing with. And so I feel like schools there needs to be opportunities within a teacher's schedule to continue learning. And I think PLCs and personal learning communities were kind of like a nod to that and trying to build it, but very few schools have a PLC structure where teachers have a shared period. There's a clear inquiry cycle that they're using to guide that time together. They're getting into each other's classrooms to see strategies in action. They're collecting data to really figure out what's working and what's not working. But I think that has to be part of it. And I would love to see teachers have more access to coaching. Like if you think of any profession where teachers are really, or where people are learning, there's often like a coaching mentor kind of system embedded into those professions. And we don't often have those. You'll have like a school district with thousands and thousands of teachers and like 3 instructional coaches or 3 people who their job is to help others learn. And it's not really scalable. So I feel like if we're going to move the needle with the majority of teachers, there has to be this focus on how are we building this professional learning infrastructure so teachers don't get stuck doing things the way they've always done them, but they're constantly like looking at their practice with a critical eye and trying to figure out how do we iterate and improve.
So let's play that back to you again. If you had an instruction coach, would you have followed?
Maybe. I didn't have access to an instructional coach, so it would be hard.
If you did, for example, I doubt you would follow that advice, though. Do you think?
I don't know. It depends. I think it depends. I think it depends what their role was. Like if I felt like they were really working with me to design a lesson using a new strategy and then were giving me some degree of support in implementing, I think I would have been open to it.
Yeah, I think the reason I raised that precisely because I think there are so many different coaches. I'm trying to drive down to the idea to say, can individual teachers be like you? Like, do you think you are a teacher or you are like have the same qualities as other teachers?
I think so.
Okay.
I mean, I'm not your, like, I do remember I was not always going to go into education. I was actually going to go to law school like my mom, and I changed gears.
You would make a very good lawyer, but teaching is much more fun. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So, but at my last year at UCLA, I changed my mind and I decided to go into education. And I will tell you that my entire family kind of gave me a strange look. Like, you don't seem like the typical teacher. You're not very patient. You're not the most nurturing person we've ever met. And I was like, okay, well, thanks, guys.
So because I'm thinking about your work, your transformation. I don't know if it's true transformation, but maybe this new thing is always in you, and then you just suddenly had to explode somewhere. Without that maternity leave, you might still find an opportunity to do this. I don't know. Okay.
Yeah.
So just tell me about how many years were you teaching before you decided to change?
About 5.
Okay.
Yeah, 5 years before I definitely was at that crossroads of, I don't know if I'm going to stay in this career, which is ironic because that's, the amount of teacher attrition that we get around that 5-year mark is significant.
By the way, when was that?
I started in 2001, so probably around 2006.
Okay. So that's really still relative, but not 2006. Today, it's 2020, right? So it's about 14 years now, right? I would say. Mm-hmm. So out of this next 14 years, you've transformed yourself. You've become an author. You've become a trainer, right? And so through this process, what did you observe? There's in you and in others.
I mean, I think I'm very much a perfectionist, type A personality. And in the beginning of my teaching career, I think I internalized my students' lack of engagement, their, clear disdain for school as a personal failure. And the more I started to treat my profession as just this opportunity to keep learning and growing, because when I started teaching, I definitely had moments where I thought, oh, I'm going to put all my curriculum together, I'm going to make binders of curriculum, and then I'm going to use them until like I retire, and I don't know that I was thinking about teaching from the perspective of this ongoing learning experience, right? I felt like I was going to learn how to be a teacher and then I was just going to teach. And what I realized is if I am going to cultivate lifelong learners, I can't do that using the exact same binder with the exact same strategies every single year. I have to model that lifelong learning, and I have to constantly iterate on my own practice to better meet the needs of these people who are in my class. And I need them to see me taking risks and me trying new things so that they feel safe doing those things. So I think I went from feeling like I'm failing at this job to I am learning how to do this, and that's not going to stop. That's it. That's an ongoing process. And my students are going to benefit from that.
And life is better, I guess, than before.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Say more about that, because we want the other teachers to know to say change actually is for the good. Because I really don't think there are many schools of education that prepares you to do the kind of teaching you've been asking for, you've been trying to promote. So tell other teachers to say what's it like after the transformation.
I mean, every day is like a surprise, like, because instead of like having the whole plan and executing the whole lesson and kind of knowing how everything's going to go, and then maybe if you're secondary, you're doing that multiple times a day, right? All of a sudden you have, I think of myself as like this architect, right? Like I have the blueprint, I have the plan, but the kids are doing the building. They're the ones doing the work. And so every day it is like this surprise where students need things I didn't anticipate. I have conversations with kids where I feel like I'm really connecting on an academic level, a human level. I see light bulbs go off. They ask questions that they never asked me when I approach teaching from a very traditional way. They get to drive some of the exploration and choose like, hey, this is the lens I want to look through for this particular assignment or this task. And this is what I would like to pursue as we work on this project. And when I give feedback, kids are sitting right there, I'm helping to guide them as they work instead of throwing a bunch of feedback on finished products. So there's just all of these moments of like student creativity and human connection and feeling like I'm so much more effective in the classroom, and students appreciate me because I'm really making time to sit with them and support them. I've had so many kids say to me, I've never gotten feedback like this in a class. I've never had a teacher sit side by side and grade my work so that like I understand what I got. I've never been given a grade interview where I could say, this is the grade I think I deserve. And so for them, even though I'm relinquishing the control, like they're so appreciative of being able to take a more active role in the learning process and have more agency.
What the word control you use is really powerful. I think in my mind, I think schools are in the business of control and been there for a long time. We practice that, right? Everybody wants to control the day, but in the end, you cannot control. So tell me a little bit about today's kids, high school kids. What are they like?
They're hilarious. But I can tell you, they don't like the focus on compliance in school, right? They don't, at this point in their development, they are craving autonomy and agency. in an environment where they have very little of either. And so I think often that combative, like the perception of teenagers is really, it's fueled by this focus on compliance and them feeling like they have no creativity, no flexibility, no voice in their day. And I work with so many teachers who, when I ask them, I say, okay, what are the biggest challenges that you face? Like, what are those hurdles that make it hard to teach and reach all students? Almost always, one of the main ideas that surface are lack of engagement and lack of motivation, student lack of engagement and motivation. And one of the things that I always point out is, like, if you look at the research on motivation, the connection to like autonomy, right, is so clear. And yet we have kids who sit in classrooms for 6-7 hours a day who don't have any opportunities to make decisions about their learning. Like, no wonder they're not motivated, right? And teenagers are so creative, and I just feel like we're missing such an important opportunity to tap into that. And I love technology, but there's so much of this that, like, the classroom needs to help them to practice some of those interpersonal, like, I'm actually looking at you and having a real conversation with you, those soft skills, there needs to be opportunities for that in the classroom as well, which is hard to do if the teacher's talking.
That's just perfect, because you were talking about schools wants to control, kids don't want to be controlled. They are not interested in this one. But some kids, I would say majority of we call good kids pretend to play along, right? And they just pretend to be there.
They know the game.
Yeah, they know the game. So what's your advice? What would be good teaching be like?
Well, I would love to see teaching be more project-based and fueled by student curiosity. I would love to see teachers embrace their facilitation kind of coaching role more. I would love to see students have opportunities to decide either what they want to focus on learning or how they want to go about learning, and having some more like opportunities to make those choices in a classroom. And I'd love to see the teacher focusing on designing learning experiences that allow kids to dive into this project-based approach to learning that aligns with some of their interests and their passions, and then really checking in with individual kids and just like figuring out with the learner what they need from you to continue to make progress, because that single plan for everybody just is never going to get there.
In high school, it's a lot of people are very much subject-based, so they work on their subject. What do you think of the idea that schools become not so much class-based, subject-based, but individual teachers working with smaller groups of people, or teachers working across different subjects? They're just serving a large group of people. So teachers' role change. You don't do the traditional 45 minutes or 40 minutes class. What do you think of that?
So actually in my work, in my last teaching position, I was piloting a program, and the idea was that there would be 3 teachers working together as a team, and we are all credentialed in different things. So I have my credential in English and technology, and we had a history teacher and a science teacher. And we were planning all of our curriculum to be interdisciplinary, project-based. And so students could move through our 3 classrooms pretty fluidly. And so instead of like me having my classroom, so I got rid of my teacher desk and all of my stuff, right? This is your space now. This room is where we're gonna focus on collaborating. And this room over here is where we're gonna do makerspace and lab kind of activities. It's set up for that. And this space over here is more quiet, independent. If you need time to think, that's where you go. And as teachers, we, instead of having rooms that were our rooms, they were just spaces that lent themselves to certain kinds of learning activities. And then we moved fluidly around. And, I would let kids know at the start of the day, at these points during this day, I'm going to run a skill station on this skill. So if that's a skill you need, you can come to this skill station. And here's your time slot to go to the lab and get independent support from the teacher, the science teacher who's going to be in here at this time. And so it was much more like, I don't need to just teach English literature and read one book after another. If you're writing a lab report or you're writing a research paper for history, let's come in and talk about how you analyze quotes or how you make a clear claim or how you use descriptive language. I can be your resource for all of these different things. And it really broke down some of those walls between subject areas. Instead of even we had 90-minute blocks, but because we shared the same population of 90 students, we could divvy up the time however we wanted. So I could keep kids for, 90 minutes or take a smaller group for 45 minutes and the other kids could go to the other classroom. So it was just much more fluid. And again, it just made it so much easier because one, I had support from a team of teachers, and two, it wasn't so structured and that traditional schedule that really sometimes makes it hard to kind of think outside the box.
How did it go with the students?
It was good. There was a learning curve. It was very much this, there's a culture shift that happens in a program like that. And there's buy-in that needs to happen, parents who are kind of a little leery, that's not how it looked when I went to school. Why are you doing it that way? So there was a lot of conversations about the why and the value and the research and all that stuff. Unfortunately, ultimately, we didn't have support from leadership. So when the program just, it ended up kind of being morphed into something different because leadership just wasn't on board.
And that's where my next question will be. I got a few more questions. It's leadership. This is you somehow, our conversation always leads to my next question. So leadership. We are encouraging teachers to be innovative, to change all this. So what's the current leadership like in schools? I mean, you've been meeting with a lot of districts, a lot of schools, what's it like?
It's so interesting. There are standout districts doing very great work, but they are the few and the far between. And my perception, this is just my perception of what holds leaders, what holds schools back, is that those folks who are in leadership positions are kind of hemmed in by things like the master schedule, by these structures that are in place, where even if they come into their leadership role, totally appreciating, we got to do this better, we are not serving all kids, there has to be a better way, I feel like they almost get, they feel like they have no room to actually do anything flexible, where I've worked with schools that want to shift to blended learning, they see value in it, but then they can't figure out how to see beyond the 50-minute period. They can't figure out how to do it and still get all their benchmark tests happening at the right time. And it makes me sad because I feel like sometimes we just need to kind of start from scratch and figure out, okay, if this is what we value, if this is what we want for kids, how do we design a learning environment that is going to get us there? Because just making small tweaks in an existing system isn't going to lead to the kind of redefining of teaching and learning that I want to get to.
So that's the, my last question. This is my last question. It's going to be interesting to see. Given what you've seen, all this leadership, teachers, students, we've covered a lot of ground. Okay, by the way, you've been very good with all this things. So my imagination is that your future research, you probably have to get to the policy level to say, God, I can change one teacher, I can change my classroom, but we got to touch leadership, we got to go to policy. So I'm going to ask you, Raina, about what kind of educational policies that can change to promote this kind of learning, more student autonomy, more agency, more voice? What kind of policy changes do you think we need?
Well, the biggest policy change, I think, and it's so simple, is just rethinking seat time, right? And how we like count kids as like learning, right? I think it's interesting. So in my research, I was at a school district where the blended teachers were basically able to release students 1 day a week. And during that release time, the teacher was in the classroom and they could meet with students individually or in small groups, which the teachers loved. They loved this time with students. It's clearly where they felt most effective. They felt like they built stronger relationships with kids. Kids were more successful. And then the kids who didn't come to meet with the teacher had that agency over their time, over the pace at which they work. It just freed the teacher up, and it was just 1 day a week. And then the state basically said, hey, not in compliance with seat time. So then students couldn't leave campus. They couldn't have complete agency over their time. They couldn't do an internship or something like that. Instead, they had to be on campus in a space with a credentialed teacher, which basically means the teacher's classroom or the library. And so all of a sudden you had this program where students and teachers really enjoyed a higher degree of agency. There was more opportunities for personalization, and they had that kind of like taken away or extremely limited. And so for me, and maybe this whole situation with COVID and the pandemic will change the way we think about seat time and learning and the value of having kids in a specific location every single day for their entire day. But I would love to see more flexibility around when and where kids are learning. And that's not to say that they don't come and do those face-to-face classes at some point during their week, but do we have to have them in the same physical location every single day at a set time for them to learn effectively? I don't think so. So I would love that to be something that's really reconsidered. Like, what does that look like? This requirement for having kids in specific locations at specific times.
Thank you, Caitlin. Well, this is actually quite wonderful because in my mind right now, the policies is governing schools is against about control. They want to know, they want to see what happens, and that needs to change. I'm going to stop this recording, and then let's see, stop recording.